The Maria Hertogh riots began on the 11th of December 1950 in Singapore after a court decided that a child who had been raised by Muslims should be returned to her Catholic biological parents. A protest by outraged Muslims escalated into a riot when images were published showing 13-year-old Maria Hertogh kneeling before a statue of the Virgin Mary. Riots in Singapore lasted until noon on 13 December 1950. 18 people were killed and 173 injured. Many properties were also damaged. Hertogh had been in the care of Che Amina bint Muhammad before being returned to her Dutch Catholic biological parents. Maria Hertogh. Early life. Maria Hertogh was born on 24 March 1937 to a Dutch Catholic family living in Tiji Mahi, near Bandung, Java, then a part of the Dutch East Indies. Her father, Adrianus Petrus Hertogh, came to Java in the 1920s as a sergeant in the Royal Netherlands East Indies Army. In the early 1930s, he married Adeline Hunter, a Eurasian of Scottish-Javanese descent, brought up in Java. Maria was baptized in the Roman Catholic Church of St. Ignatius at Tijemahi on 10 April by a Catholic priest. When World War II broke out, Adrianus Hertogh, as a sergeant in the Dutch army, was captured by the Imperial Japanese Army and sent to a POW camp in Japan, where he was kept until 1945. Meanwhile, Adeline Hertogh stayed with her mother, Nor Louise, and her 5 children, among whom Maria was the third and youngest daughter. On 29 December 1942, Mrs. Hertogh gave birth to her 6th child, a boy. 3 days later, Maria went to stay with Amina bint Muhammad, a 42-year-old Malay woman from Kememan, Terengganu, Malaya and a close friend of Nor Louise. Adoption. Adeline Hertogh's version according to Maria's biological mother, Adeline Hertogh. In testimony given in evidence before the court at the hearing in November 1950, she was persuaded by her mother after the birth of her 6th child to allow Maria to go and stay with Amina in Bandung for 3 or 4 days. Consequently, Amina arrived on 1 January 1943 to fetch Maria. When the child was not returned, Mrs. Hertogh borrowed a bicycle on 6 January and set out to retrieve her daughter. She claimed that she was arrested by a Japanese sentry on the outskirts of Bandung as she did not possess a pass and was therefore interned. From her internment camp, she smuggled a letter to her mother, requesting for her children to be sent to her. This Nor Louise did, but Maria was not among them. So Mrs. Hertogh asked her mother to fetch Maria from Amina. Her mother later wrote and told her that Amina wanted to keep Maria for 2 more days, after which she herself would bring the child to the camp. This did not materialize and Mrs. Hertogh did not see Maria throughout her internment. After her release, she could find neither Maria nor Amina. Muslim. Upon arriving with Amina, Maria was given the name Nada bint Marif. For unknown reasons, her new family moved to Jakarta for a period before moving back to Bandung, where Amina worked for the Japanese military police as an interpreter until the end of the war. In 1947, fearing harm upon the family during the Indonesian National Revolution because Maria was a Putih, Amina moved back to her hometown of Kememan, Terengganu, Malaya. By then Maria was the same as any other Malay Muslim girl of her age. She spoke only Malay, wore Malay clothes and practiced her religion devoutly. Custody battle. In 1945, with the end of World War II, Sergeant Hertogh was released and returned to Java, where he reunited with his wife. The couple said that they inquired about Maria but could find neither their daughter nor Amina. They then returned to the Netherlands after requesting the Dutch authorities in Java and Singapore to try to trace the child. Investigations were then made by the Red Cross Society, the Indonesian Repatriation Service, the Royal Netherlands Army, and local police. Finally, in September 1949, Amina and Maria were traced to the kampung in which they were living. Negotiations were opened to retrieve Maria in early 1950. The Dutch consulate offered $500 to make up for Amina's expenses in bringing up the girl for 8 years. Amina rejected the offer and refused to give up her foster daughter. Nonetheless, she was persuaded to travel with Maria to Singapore in April to discuss the issue with the Dutch consul general. However, Amina could not be persuaded, and the consulate applied to the High Court of Singapore on the 22nd of April for Maria to be delivered into the custody of the Social Welfare Department. Pending further order, the Chief Justice heard the request the same day and approved the application ex parte. The next day, an officer from the department served the order on Amina and took Maria away. After a routine medical examination at the Middle Road Hospital, she was admitted to the Girls' Home Crafts Centre at York Hill. From this point onwards, Maria had made it clear that she wanted to stay with Amina and did not wish to be returned to her natural parents. However, after a 15-minute hearing on the 17th of May, the High Court ruled that the custody of Maria be granted to the Hertoghs. As Amina and Maria exited the court via the back door, a car from the consulate was waiting to take Maria away. Maria refused to enter the car and clung on to Amina, both shouting in Malay that they would kill themselves rather than be separated. A large crowd quickly formed around the commotion. It was only after much persuasion that Amina agreed to enter the car together with Maria and pay a visit to her lawyer, who explained that Maria had to be given up until an appeal was made. The duo then parted in tears, with Maria returned to York Hill for temporary safekeeping. Maria stayed at York Hill for 2 more months under a further order from the Chief Justice pending appeal, which was filed on the 28th of July. The verdict was an overruling of the earlier decision. Aside from the ex parte order to hand Maria to the Social Welfare Department, the appellate court found ambiguity in the Dutch consul general's representation of Maria's natural father, a rather minor and technical detail but apparently significant enough under the circumstance. Both Amina and Maria were overjoyed. Controversial marriage. On the 1st of August 1950, Maria was married in a Muslim ritual to 22-year-old Mansour Darby, a Malayan-born who was then a teacher in training at the Bukit Panjang Government School. The marriage could have been a maneuver by Amina to prevent further attempts by the Hertoghs to get back their daughter, as Maria returned to live with Amina after the wedding night and the new couple never consummated their marriage. Whether such speculation was true was unimportant in the subsequent development of events, in which Maria, a willing bride nonetheless, became the central figure. The first challenges on the appropriateness of the marriage actually came from the Muslim community. On the 10th of August, a Muslim leader wrote to the Straits Times, pointing out that although Islamic law permits the marriage of girls starting after puberty, there were Muslim countries such as Egypt that legislated for a minimum marriage age of 16. He added, however, that it would not be in the interest of the friendly understanding between Christians and Muslims to object to the marriage since it had already taken place. The latter view was held by the Muslim population at large, albeit in a more antagonistic mood against the Dutch and Europeans at large. Second appeal. Meanwhile, the Hertoghs had not given up legal pursuit to retrieve their daughter. Only a day after the marriage, Amina received the Hertoghs' representative lawyers from Kuala Lumpur. The lawyers deliver a letter demanding the return of Maria by the 10th of August, failing which legal action would be taken. Believing that the marriage settled the matter, Amina and Mansour both ignored the deadline. The Hertoghs did not. On the 26th of August, an originating summons was taken out, under the Guardianship of Infants Ordinance, by the Hertoghs as plaintiffs against Amina, Maria and Mansour, who were all made defendants. The hearing did not begin till the 20th of November. For 4 months the matter hung in suspense. During this time, Maria rarely left her residence in the house of M.A. Majid, then president of the Muslim Welfare Association, because in her own words, she attracted too much attention. Nevertheless, media coverage on the incident had grown to a global scale. Letters from Muslim organizations in Pakistan promising financial and other help arrived, some going so far as to declare any further move by the Dutch government to separate the couple as an open challenge to the Muslim world. Pledges of aid also came from Maria's native Indonesia and as far as Saudi Arabia. The hearing finally opened, and Maria's natural mother, Maria Hertogh, travelled down to Singapore to attend. The judge, Justice Brown, delivered the verdict 2 weeks later. The marriage, instead of resolving the dispute, had instead complicated it. Justice Brown had two issues on his hand, namely the legality of the marriage and the custody of Maria. He held that the marriage was invalid because Maria's country of domicile was by law that of her natural father, i.e., the Netherlands. Under the Dutch laws, the minimum age of marriage for girls was 16. The English law applicable in Singapore recognized the marriage laws of the subject's country of domicile. An exception to the above point could not be established because neither Mansour, born in Kelantan, could be proved to be domiciled in Singapore nor Maria be considered a Muslim by law. During her minority, Maria's natural father, who was a Christian, had the legal right to control her religion. He had testified that he would never consent to her conversion to Islam. Having overruled the purported marriage, Justice Brown went on to deal with what he described as the most difficult question of custody. He noted that his duty to the law required him to have regard primarily to the welfare of the infant. He believed this meant that he not only had to consider the current wishes of Maria, but also her future well-being. He stated, "It is natural that she should now wish to remain in Malaya among people whom she knows. But who can say that she will have the same views some years hence after her outlooks has been enlarged, and her contacts extended, in the life of the family to which she belongs?" He also noted that whatever the details of the contested initiation of the custody at the end of 1942 might be, Adrianis Hertogh had not been part of it and had not abrogated his parental rights. He therefore awarded the custody of Maria to the Hertoghs and ordered that she should be handed over to her mother with immediate effect. Stay at the convent. When policewomen came to take Maria away, she wept and clung to Amina and Mansour. Amina fainted on the spot and a doctor standing by had to attend to her. Mansour advised Maria to concede for the time being and promised that he and others would carry on the legal fight. Thus Maria allowed herself to be brought away into a car. Outside, the police, including a Gurkha contingent, held back a crowd of several hundred. The car delivered Maria to the Roman Catholic convent of the Good Shepherd, run by the Sisters of the Good Shepherd, at Thomson Road. Mrs. Hertogh stayed at another address for a few days, from where she visited Maria daily, before moving into the convent herself. According to an official of the Netherlands Consulate General, such arrangement was because of greater convenience, while the stay of execution pending appeal was in effect. But it proved to be the falsest step, the spark that lit the fuse of the subsequent riots. First and foremost, the press was not barred from entering the convent grounds, nor were they restricted in any way in their approach to the incident, which had been nothing shy of sensational. On the 5th of December, the Singapore Standard published on its front page a photograph of Maria standing holding hands with the Reverend Mother. There were several more pictures on page 2, under the headline, "Bertha knelt before Virgin Mary statue." The Malay press retorted. The Utus and Melayu published on the 7th of December 3 photographs of Maria weeping and being comforted by a nun, as well as articles about Maria's lonely and miserable life in the convent. These pictures, whether presenting Maria as happy or sad, mostly showed Maria surrounded by symbols of Christian faith. The Muslims, who looked upon Maria as one of their own, were deeply offended by such pictures, not to mention the sensational reports some of which explicitly labeled the case as a religious issue between Islam and Christianity. On the 9th of December, an organization calling itself the Nadra Action Committee was formally constituted under the leadership of Karim Ghani, a Muslim political activist from Rangoon. This extreme organization solicited support among local Muslims by distributing free copies of its newspaper, The Dawn. Karim Ghani had also made an open speech at the Sultan Mosque on the 8th of December in which he mentioned jihad as a final resort. In the light of these potent signs of a great disturbance, the Criminal Investigation Department sent a memo to the Colonial Secretary suggesting moving Maria back to York Hill to avoid further inciting Muslim anger. The Secretary did not agree on grounds that he had received no such representations from Muslim leaders, nor did he have the authority to remove Maria without further court orders, weak excuses since Maria could be relocated with her mother's consent. Nonetheless, it cannot be said definitively that moving Maria out of the convent at such a late stage could have averted the riots. The appeal hearing opened on the 11th of December. Maria stayed at the convent and did not attend. Since early morning, crowds carrying banners and flags with star and crescent symbols began to gather around the Supreme Court. By noon, when the hearing eventually began, the restive crowd had grown to 2,000 to 3,000 in number. The court threw out the appeal within 5 minutes. The brevity of the hearing convinced the gathering that the colonial legal system was biased against Muslims. The riots erupted. The riots continued for 3 days and a curfew was imposed for 2 weeks. The mob moved out to attack any Europeans and even Eurasians in sight. They overturned cars and burnt them. The police force, its lower ranks largely consisted of Malays who sympathized with the rioters' cause, were ineffective in quelling the riots. By nightfall the riots had spread to even the more remote parts of the island. Help from the British military was enlisted only at around 6:45 p.m. Major General Dunlop promptly deployed 2 internal security battalions while calling in further reinforcements from Malaya. Meanwhile, various Muslim leaders appealed over the radio for the riots to cease. Reinforcements arrived early on the 12th of December, but riotous incidents continued on that day. The troops and police only managed to regain control of the situation by noon on the 13th of December. In total, 18 people were killed, among whom were 7 Europeans or Eurasians, 2 police officers, and 9 rioters shot by the police or military. 173 were injured, many of them seriously, 119 vehicles were damaged, and at least 2 buildings were set on fire. Subsequently, 2 weeks of 24-hour curfew were imposed, and it was a long time before complete law and order was re-established. The trials. After the riot, the police set up a special investigation unit which detained 778 people, among them Karim Ghani. Out of these, 403 were released unconditionally and 106 were released on various conditions. The police eventually brought rioting charges against 200 people, of whom 25 were acquitted, 100 were convicted, 62 were referred to the Inquiry Advisory Committee, and 7 were brought to trial at the Assize Court for wanton killing, and 5 of them were subsequently sentenced to death on the gallows. One of the 5 that was sentenced to the gallows was A.K.S. Othman Ghani, a respectable Indian businessman from Madras, the founder of the once famous Jubilee Cafe and Restaurant. On 25 August 1951, Tunku Abdul Rahman, who would later become the first Prime Minister of Malaysia, took over as the President of UMNO, a Malay, and therefore Muslim party, that remains the largest and ruling political party in Malaysia today. He immediately set out to save the 5 on death row. Having garnered support from the Muslim population, Abdul Rahman placed pressure on the authorities, who finally gave in. The British government was expecting their role as the colonial master to end very soon and did not wish to leave behind grim memories. The death sentences for all 5 were commuted to life imprisonment. Reviews. A commission of inquiry was appointed by Governor Franklin Gimson. It was headed by Sir Lionel Leach, a member of the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council. The commission placed large blame on the police command for not having anticipated the violence from many indicators between 2 and the 11th of December. Furthermore, when the riots first started, the police failed to act promptly to disperse the crowd. The Gurkha contingent standing by was not put into action, while too much dependence was placed on Malay policemen, many of whom defected or at least hesitated to carry out their duties. The British House of Commons criticised the colonial government for its poor handling of the situation. Present-day government of Singapore also attributed the tragedy to the insensitivity of the colonial government towards the racial and religious feelings of the locals. It cites the incident as a vital lesson learnt in the importance of racial and religious understanding and harmony. It also cites the incident as a case for placing a certain degree of governmental control on the media, especially when racial or religious issues are implicated.